The original legislation weakening the Public Records Act passed as part of the state's budget package. It made compliance with parts of the CPRA optional rather than mandatory for local governments, meaning a city, county, or school district could refuse to disclose public records without saying why. Joining me to talk about the Assembly's action on the bill is media law attorney Guylan Cummins with Shepard, Mullen, Richter, and Hampton. Guylan Cummins is also a First Amendment consultant for KPBS. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
Now, how would the changes in Assembly Bill 76, those proposed changes, how would they have made it harder to get access to public records?
They would have essentially gutted the act in a couple of ways. Number one, it would not have required the government to give you a reason as to why it was not going to produce the records. That's a very important piece of analysis when you're thinking about whether you need to sue to get the records or not, is the reason why they're being withheld. Secondly, with respect to certain forms of electronic data, it would have said that even if the agency had it, it didn't have to make it available in that format. It could produce it, in pages that you had to, that were, instead of being searchable, you had to go through and basically try and find a needle in the haystack. And it essentially took away the timelines. And right now the government has to respond in 10 days, and that's very important for timely information.
I wanted to ask you about that because I read that the new rules that the public or press could, or anybody really could ask for information, and they didn't necessarily have to tell you if they were going to give it to you or not. Is that true?
That's right. And again, that's a really critical piece of information. If the reason you're not getting the information has to do with a valid reason of privacy, you probably won't sue. If it has to do with the government trying to hide misconduct, then you probably will sue.
So clearly, the media, journalists, this would have impacted us immensely in trying to get information. But how would the changes impact the public, your everyday citizen?
Well, a lot of people use the California Public Records Act to get information. Businesses, big, small corporations, and just individuals. If I'm an individual, then I want to know, for example, whether the county has paid secret settlements to basically buy off misconduct claims. I'm entitled to know that.
Okay. Apparently the change was a cost-cutting attempt. News outlets already pay for some of the requests, it's my understanding. So how was this supposed to help the state save money?
Essentially, the way it's been being explained is that there was a constitutional amendment that if, in fact, the California Public Records Act is a state mandate that transfers from the state to local agencies certain duties, then, in fact, the state has to appropriate money and pay for it. What was happening is, under the new provisions of the California Public Records Act, they have to assist you if you're a normal citizen in trying to ask for the right information, not simply stonewall you. And so cities and counties were basically charging for that time and submitting claims that were largely padded back to the government.
The Assembly voted today 52 to 25 to put this portion of it back to what it was originally, so public access as it stood. But San Diego City Councilman Scott Sherman asked to have the council here locally approve a Public Records Act for San Diego to guarantee access, he says, to records and provide a reason if the request was denied. Do you think that's still a prudent idea?
Well, there are many cities like San Francisco, for example, that have their own private sunshine acts, but that doesn't eradicate their responsibilities under the state statutes or the state constitution. And while I think that cities can do that, and it's sometimes helpful to have additional requirements for producing public information, I think that we need the state patchwork or fabric, if you will, because that makes sure that everybody has a minimal threshold of compliance.
What about amending the state constitution? Is that something that's feasible in this to make sure that this access stays?
Constitutional amendments are much harder to get passed, and so there are proponents of it. They say, essentially pass a constitutional amendment that local agencies bear the cost of producing their own records. That'll be the end of it. When and if that could get passed, I'm not certain, and the alternative that we have right now is not acceptable with AB 76. So I would just as soon see the governor veto it.
Yeah, so right now there's two, the budgets are before him, one with this provision and one without, so I guess he's expected to vote on this soon. Guylan Cummins, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thank you for having me.